Welcome to the nervous system. You should have already copied down the notes if you're watching this on Thursday, but if not, here's your chance to kind of follow along. And we are going to be covering all of the human body systems. If you haven't looked at the notes, you're not sure how many there are, you can click on our Amoeba Sisters video down here in the bottom left-hand corner and watch that. It'll run you through all the body systems. We'll get to them each in turn, but we've decided to start with the nervous system. So I'll just do a quick talk through of the first half of the notes at least, and then you can work on your worksheets. So the picture over here to the right I just thought was kind of cool. It is actually a real nervous system taken from a donated body. This is over 100 years old. It was affixed and dissected out of a donor body by a couple of medical students. It took hundreds of hours of surgery for it to happen, but it's just kind of mind-boggling, all the nerves that are inside the body and the fact that they could be teased out like that. I found that kind of fascinating. And I don't think we want to watch the Amoeba Sisters right now. You can watch that on your own time. So let's move on from there. All right, human body system. So humans are super complex, obviously, as are other more complicated multicellular organisms. We're just talking about it in terms of humanity, since we are. And the reason they are so complex is we have to maintain homeostasis in our environment, and that is not necessarily an easy thing, meeting all your life needs and maintaining that balance. Cells are grouped up for efficiency, simply because with literally billions, if not trillions of cells that make you up, they have to be able to do their job quickly and efficiently, and be able to communicate and move material where they have to and send signals where they need to. And if it wasn't efficient, if it was a complicated mess, of course that would not lead to all of your life functions being met adequately, and that would not be okay. So evolution has grouped things up by efficiency, so we are a finely tuned machine. Now, there's always changes going on. So we're in this state called dynamic equilibrium, meaning there's always change, but the change is there to keep things always balanced and equal. The picture on the left shows a scenario where you could have one faucet filling up a container, but that container has another faucet letting out the water at the exact same rate. And that container would never get full because it's going in and coming out at the same rate. And so there's change going on. It's constantly different water, but it's in equilibrium, meaning it never goes up or down. And that's the way our bodies function. There's always changes, but different reactions and such happen in order to keep things more or less the same, or at least within a fairly narrow range. So in multicellular organisms, we've had this on tests and quizzes and such before, but just to reiterate, cells are the simplest building block of life. Cells work together to form tissues. Tissues of different types work together to form organs. And then you can have organs that all function for a common goal to make organ systems. And a group of organ systems together is going to create the organism. So tissue, group of cells that perform the same function. Organ, group of tissues that work together to perform a complex function. So we're going up in complexity. In an organ system, you have, like I said, a group of organs all working together for a common goal. Now, human organ systems, as I said, there's a lot of them. Specifically 11, I believe it was. And it sort of depends on how you break it up. But we are going to start with the nervous system and work through the others, either again as a group or individually. We'll see how the year progresses here. Now, the goal of these organ systems is to have an organism that is maintaining homeostasis, which is not an easy task. During our daily life, we are always doing things. Even if you're sitting still, your body is doing things as far as respiration and excretion and digestion and circulation. And when one of those systems changes, it affects the others. And so there's constantly feedback among them, talking between the different groups to maintain that homeostasis, that balance. So in our nervous system, the big player, of course, is the brain. And the brain itself is not just one solid lump of brainy goodness. There are many individual parts that we are still, to this day, learning about how they all work and interact and function, because the brain is what makes us special among organisms on Earth. We have a capacity to think and reason that, far as we know, is beyond any other. And so it's a topic of research, and there's a lot to learn still. So the nervous system controls and coordinates the functions throughout the body. And the reason it has to do that, and it's such a big job, is there's always internal and external stimuli, meaning there's always signals coming in of one variety of or another. And the nervous system controls how we react to it, whether it's a conscious reaction or whether it's an unconscious reaction that your body just takes care of without you thinking about it. Pretty much all multicellular organisms have communication systems. Some are more complicated than others, but they have to have some sort of communication system. If you've got thousands or millions or billions or more cells all working together in an organism, they can't all just have their own purpose and not communicate. It's just not an option. That would not lead to a successful life plan. So pretty much all of them have some sort of communication system. And the nervous system is really fast, so that's the key to it being successful. So you have specialized cells that help messages go from one cell to another throughout the body. And if it's working properly, you have smooth and efficient communication that takes fractions of a second to go from one end to the other and back. So the nervous system is an electrical system. You have electrical impulses, electrical signals being carried along your nerves and being transferred between nerves that send information wherever the destination might be, whether it's the spinal cord or the brain. The basic building block of the nervous system are neurons. Those are your nerve cells that build your nervous system. And there's different types of neurons. There's sensory neurons, motor neurons, and interneurons. And the name kind of gives a clue what's going on here. Sensory has to do with your senses and sensing the environment and stimuli. Motor, there's going to be some motion, so these are going to be attached to muscles, and you're going to be able to stimulate these to move muscles. And the interneurons are the ones that relay messages between the two different types and carry the signals along. So sensory neurons carry impulses from the sense organs to the spinal cord and brain. Motor, from the brain and spinal cord back to the muscles or to the glands. And the interneurons are connecting them. So they are performing the vital task of connecting the thinking part to the doing part, or the sensing part to the thinking part to the doing part. So they have a different look about them based on their function. Sensory neurons have some sort of receptor. It could be a heat receptor, taste receptor. There's different types of receptors for the environment. The relay ones are going to be designed such that they can connect one to the other. So you're going to have fibers on one end that can connect to fibers on the other end of one next to it. And so they can pass signals between them. And motor neurons are going to be able to connect to muscles and glands, like it said, to send the impulse and carry the signal to where it needs to be. So they have slightly different designs based on their function. What they have in common, though, you have the cell body, the main part of the neuron. That's where you have the nucleus. That's where you have the cytoplasm and all the basic organelles that we've talked about when we talked about cells. That's where the majority of metabolic activities like respiration and such are going to take place. Because even these cells, they're still cells, so they have to carry out the basic life functions. The dendrites are at the end of it, usually coming off the cell body. Short branched extensions. They literally look like branches in a lot of cases. And these carry impulses from the environment toward the cell body, where it can then be passed along. And kind of like a wire that is carrying a signal. The axon, long fiber, which carries the impulses away from the cell body toward the next nerve cell where it's going to pass along the information. And it ends in axon terminals that can be quite a distance away from the cell body, and that's going to interface with the next neuron and pass its signal along. Neurons only have one axon coming off them. They can have many dendrites, but only one axon. The myelin sheath surrounds the axon and acts like the rubber coating on a wire. Just like in your home, you have all sorts of wires going throughout it, but they have a coating on the outside so things don't get short-circuited and sparked and burn your house down. In the case of a neuron, the myelin sheath keeps the electrical impulses where they're supposed to be so they can travel quickly away from the cell body toward the next neuron. If you don't have adequate fat around them, then the signal can get lost or degraded and the impulse isn't going to make it where it needs to be successfully. So insulating membrane surrounding the axon. So an impulse is that signal that the nerve passes along, and it happens when there's a stimulus from the environment, and then it can be sent along the axon toward the terminal branches where it can interface with the next neuron. So the terminal branch of one is going to interface with the dendrites of the next, and across that gap, it's called a synapse, the information has to be passed. And there are chemicals called neurotransmitters that allow that to happen. So the synapse is where the neuron can transfer the impulse to another cell. The space between them is the synapse. And neurotransmitters are the chemicals used to facilitate the transfer of information. If you've ever been to the dentist and they numbed you so you couldn't feel the pain that was being inflicted upon you, the chemicals used in that anesthesia are usually ones that are there they interfere with the neurotransmitters. They don't allow the pain impulse to be sent from whatever might be sensing it, the dendrites at the source of the pain. They don't allow it to be passed along to the rest of your nervous system, so they interfere with that. And that's how anesthesia typically works, at least numbing agents. You are going to have to know the basic parts. You should have done the worksheet labeling the parts and their function on Tuesday. I think that was the assignment. If you have not, then you're going to want to get on that. But you do have to know dendrites, where the cell body is, the myelin sheath, and the axon that is inside the myelin sheath, and the fact that a synapse is where the terminal end of the axon interfaces with the synapse of the next neuron. So you're going to have to know those parts. So this is probably a good one to study from for that. Now the human nervous system is divided into two big chunks, just to make it simpler for us to understand, because it's a complicated network of neurons. You have the central nervous system, and the central nervous system is there for processing, relaying, analyzing information. And you have the peripheral nervous system, which is receiving the information and passing it along to the central nervous system. Your central nervous system is your brain and all the parts thereof. So your cerebrum is the biggest part, your cerebellum, your brainstem. Those are on the next slide, I think. Thalamus and hypothalamus, these are all parts that are part of your central nervous system. They cover, if you look close at the picture, you can see different lobes cover different things like speech and taste and memory and smell and hearing and balance. They're all in different portions of your brain. The cerebrum is the single biggest part. If you've ever seen a picture of a brain, the wrinkly outer coating that you saw and said, hey, that's a brain, that's the cerebrum. That's the biggest part, which all the wrinkles and folds add increased surface area, so there's even more capacity to it. That's why it's so wrinkly and folded upon. It's helped to increase the surface area so you can have more neurons in there. The cerebrum is responsible for voluntary activities. It's also the site of intelligence, learning, judgment. There are 4 lobes to it: the frontal, temporal, parietal, and occipital lobes. 2 hemispheres, meaning there's a left half of your brain and a right half that are only connected by just a little bit right in the middle, called the corpus callosum. It provides the highway between the 2 sides. It is possible to have that split, damaged, so the 2 sides can't talk to each other. That's a thing. Most people aren't born that way, but it's not unheard of. And oddly enough, the left side of your brain controls the right side of your body. The right side of your brain controls the left side of your body. So if you get in a car accident and hit the right side of your head and damage your brain, it's going to probably affect the left side of your body. Or if you know someone who might have had a stroke, the same sort of thing. They might have damage on one side of the brain, and it affects the opposite side of the body. Some animals, marine mammals, when they sleep, will shut off one side of their brain to rest it, while the other side still does enough to keep them alive. And so, like, one fin might work while it's sleeping. They'll swim in circles because one side of the brain's taking a nap while the other one's still awake. The cerebellum is the second largest region of the brain, more toward the back of your head. And that is the region responsible for your balance and grace and coordination, all that good stuff. And if you lack balance, coordination, and grace, maybe you have an underdeveloped cerebellum. That's why you're clumsy and fall down a lot. But with practice, you can hone its skills, so don't give up. The brain stem is deeper down inside along your spinal cord at the very base of your neck. And the brain stem handles very basic but important functions. It's critical for life. You don't want damage to your brain stem. There's the pons and medulla oblongata. If you've ever watched The Waterboy with Adam Sandler, they refer to the medulla oblongata in there. But that's going to be quite an old movie, but maybe you've watched it. The blood pressure, heart rate, breathing, swallowing, they're all controlled in the brainstem. These are really important basic life functions. Damage to the brainstem means you're going to have problems with your heart beating, blood pressure. You might stop breathing. So you can't damage that and survive in any significant way. Even organisms that don't have super complicated brains will have this portion of their primitive brain to control all those basic life functions. Then you have the thalamus and hypothalamus between the brainstem and the cerebrum. And we're receiving messages here. So sensory receptors, and it sort of pushes the information to the right place in the brain. So it helps with further processing and dividing up the signals. The hypothalamus is the control center for hunger and thirst and fatigue, body temperature. People sometimes are born with improperly functioning hypothalamus, so they can't feel full, or maybe they never have a desire to eat one way or the other. You clearly have to maintain your body temperature, so that's a vital and important role as well. All right, the spinal cord. The spinal cord is the superhighway for your nervous system. A lot of signals come to it, and they get passed along it between the outer regions of your body and the brain. Now, some reflexes are handled in the spinal cord. Basic reflexes, meaning a reflex is a quick automatic response to a stimulus, like your blink reflex, or if you go to the doctor, they whack you with that little hammer thing in the knee. That's a reflex. It's a response. It's built in. It doesn't have to go to your brain for processing and to be thought about how you should respond. It's just an innate thing that it's like a program that's sitting there waiting to run. As soon as the signal is received that sets it into motion, it happens. So these can happen really quickly. Many of the reflexes are there to save you. I mean, like your blink reflex. If you see something just out of the corner of your eye, you automatically want to blink because it could be the difference between preserving your sight and not. So it's a hard one to overcome, and it's a necessary one. So sneezing and blinking are good examples of reflexes. So It's faster than having to think about it. Your brain's busy. You wouldn't want to have to think about everything that could save you. So some reflexes are going to speed up the response to danger. Now, the reflex arc, they call it, the path, the steps that occur in a reflex in order to make it happen. They're laid out here. You can see it's labeled. I'm just going to kind of read through it with you. So the first part, you have when they whack you with that little hammer thing in the knee, that hits a nerve. The stretch sensor excites the sensory neuron. So it causes the dendrites respond to that being whacked and being stretched out. It excites a sensory neuron. The neuron sends the impulse to the spinal cord. The spinal cord automatically knows what that signal is. And it sets into motion two things, actually. In order for your leg to kick, you have to relax one muscle and you have to contract another muscle. So the third step here is to relax the back of your leg while contracting the top of your leg, your quadriceps. And it sends that out, gets to your muscle, and it happens. The quadriceps contract, the femoris relax, biceps femoris relaxes, and it causes the leg to kick. And all this happens within a split second. So stimulus, sensor, sensory neuron, interneuron to carry it to the spinal cord. The motor neurons, one turns on, one turns off to release one muscle and activate another. And you get your response all instantly, or close to instantly. The peripheral nervous system, that's the outskirts. Your central nervous system is your brain and your spinal cord. All the other stuff that feeds into it and gathers most of your sensory information, that's your peripheral nervous system. It lies outside of the central. It consists of all the nerves and cells that are not part of the brain or spinal cord, including the cranial nerves, up in there, up by the cranium of your head. You have two divisions. You have the sensory side, which picks up signals, and the motor side, which responds to the signals. So central nervous system, your brain and all its parts. Peripheral nervous system, all the other outer neurons and their sensory ability and their responsibility if they're connected to your muscular system. Now, in the peripheral nervous system, you also have a division as well. You have automatic things and you have voluntary things, autonomic and somatic. So the sensory division takes impulses from sense organs to the central nervous system, the motor back the other way, from the central nervous systems to the muscle or glands to make them respond. The somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system are coming off that. That'll be the next slide. So you have your sensory neuron sending out the signal. The interneuron carries it, and it goes to the rest of your central nervous system. When it comes back, it goes by way of the motor neuron, which connects to a muscle or a gland to cause a response. So somatic regulates conscious activities. If you want your leg to move, that's going to be it. If you want to twitch your nose or blink your eyes and you're in control of it, it's the somatic nervous system. So you're controlling your skeletal muscles, especially with these. Some reflexes are part of this. They happen automatically, but it's still part of the somatic nervous system. The autonomic, these are involuntary or automatic responses. Things like your heart beating, your lungs doing their job, your liver, your colon, your salivary glands, all that stuff. That's going to be automatic. You don't really have a lot of control over that. If you run, your body, you don't have to tell your body to speed up your heart rate. It knows what to do. It's part of the autonomic nervous system. Now, even this can be divided up still further into the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And again, we just have to divide all this up because there's so many things going on. Parasympathetic might constrict the bronchi in your lungs. Sympathetic might relax them. So it's just the response is all that's the difference we're talking about here. So I don't think we're going to have to worry too much about it, but there's different aspects to it. All right, so that runs us through at least the highlights. You're going to be working on your packet for the topic and a couple other worksheets, but hopefully the walkthrough of the notes helped a little bit. I know you filled them in already or should have, and if not, hopefully you got through it. Thanks for watching.